We are now entered into the fourth year of a vicious, terrible war in Ukraine after Russia invaded the country now nearly 4 years ago. President Trump, just a short time ago, after he completed this phone conversation, highly anticipated phone call with Vladimir Putin, they spent an hour and a half on the phone. At one point, Putin said that a condition is no more aid or intel to Ukraine, which, of course, they rely on heavily to keep going. There's a discussion of a 30-day ceasefire on infrastructure. So here's what President Trump, this is his first reveal after the phone call in terms of what he wants to share on Truth Social. He said, my phone conversation today with President Putin of Russia was a very good and productive one. We agreed, he says, to an immediate ceasefire on all energy and infrastructure, with an understanding that they will be quickly working to have a complete ceasefire and ultimately an end to this very horrible war between Russia and Ukraine. This war would never have started if I were president, ! He writes. Many elements of a contract for peace were discussed, including the fact that thousands of soldiers are being killed, and both President Putin and President Zelensky would like to see it end. That process is now in full force and effect, and we will hopefully, for the sake of humanity, get the job done. Senior correspondent Benjamin Hall is here. His new book, which is out today, is the sequel to Saved, which is his incredible story. This new book is called Resolute: How We Humans Keep Finding Ways to Beat the Toughest Odds. And the Fox Nation special, Resolute, with Benjamin Hall, both out today. You can download that and watch it on Fox Nation. Ben, it's always good to see you. You know, I'm just struck by the parallel nature of your story and Ukraine's story as they try to stay resolute to survive as well. What do you think as you watch this back and forth? You've spent a lot of time covering these stories in Europe and this war in Ukraine, about the outlines of this early deal.
Well, first of all, it's interesting because it's a partial ceasefire, they say. And the Russians have said that the order was immediately passed on to the Russian generals and military that they would no longer be attacking energy and infrastructure in Ukraine. Now, that's really positive. It's a step forward. But then there seems to be this caveat. We're not certain if it means hand in hand with aid and security being stopped, being given to Ukraine. And so, look, it is certainly a partial ceasefire, and every step in the right direction is a good one. But the Ukrainians will be looking at this and saying they already gave a lot of concessions. President Trump really forced them to the table. He held these back, and they came to a ceasefire, and they will be asking why more pressure isn't put on Putin to come up with a proper ceasefire. And remember, the ceasefire wasn't supposed to be unconditional. It leads to a peace deal. So it's supposed to be a 30-day ceasefire during which they discuss the other issues at hand, and that is the main one. But Putin at the moment seems to be sort of haphazardly moving into this first ceasefire.
So you wonder what the reaction in Ukraine will be. As President Trump said at the White House in that heated back and forth, they don't have a lot of cards right now in terms of negotiation to end this war, Ben.
No, and at the moment, Russia feels that it really is in the offensive and in the stronger position. They've just kicked the Ukrainians almost out of Russia in the Kursk area. That was a big card for the Ukrainians. They were going to, at one point, say, we'll give you back Kursk in exchange for keeping these pieces of land. So they've lost that. Vladimir Putin has been very clear that he wants conditions that Ukraine can never join NATO. There will be no European peacekeepers in there, that the aid in the military has to stop, that the 3 areas in the eastern Ukraine have to be Russian. Those are big, big demands. And so seeing how that aligns with Ukraine's demands, which are effectively all the opposite, is really tough to see. But with with Russia constantly taking territory, moving forward, it seems like a pretty good place for Russia at the moment. It's
interesting to look back at a speech that Putin gave in 2007, Ben. And he said, we have reached that decisive moment when we must seriously think about the architecture of global security. It was a speech in Munich, and he accused NATO of breaking a promise by expanding into Eastern Europe, and he called for an end to U.S. hegemony. Vladimir Putin's real goals in all of this have been really consistent throughout his acquisition of Crimea and Georgia and all the moves he's made into Ukraine.
Yeah, and if you look at the writing that he's done, he's very keen on enlarging Russia and going back to perhaps the Soviet empire as it used to be. Now, no one quite knows if it is because he is trying to push NATO back, he sees that as a threat, or whether he just wants to continue expanding the Russian empire. So getting to the real basis of what drives Putin is interesting, but we do know that he wants to leave a legacy behind him, and part of that legacy is expanding. So many people feel that even if you have a peace deal at the moment, that in a few years they are greatly fearful that Putin will try again, which is why one of the key demands on the Ukrainians is that you must make it in any peace deal a porcupine state. You must give it enough weapons that Russia can no longer attack in the future. That's a main issue Putin will push back against. Yeah,
we've heard the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, talk about that. Give us one sort of resolute snippet, Ben, to give us an insight into why you wanted to write this book and what your message is to the people who followed your story.
It's interesting because really the book is about healing from the scars of war. We talk about Ukraine, we see what's happening in Gaza, and I think the key message is that, look, as bad as things can be, and I've experienced the worst myself, you can always get through it. You have to find a way through it. You find the resilience, you adapt, and you keep building. Not only can you keep rebuilding, I like to think that you can get stronger when you go through struggle. Now, I found that I used to think that being in hospital was going to be the most difficult moment. But what I discovered actually was that when I got home and I didn't have the doctors and the nurses and the physios, that it became even harder. Realigning yourself with your injuries and the impact that has is difficult. And I share that with the thousands of people who have reached out to me who say they're having difficult times at home. And what I've tried to do in this book, if I try to tell stories that I've gone through, both the good moments, but also the very bad moments. And I talk about the flashbacks, I talk about the TBIs, I talk about the pain. But in each one, I try to describe how I got through them feeling optimistic, how I managed to get through them. And I just hope that this book will help people who are going through something difficult. I hope it'll be a page-turner as well. And I'm very proud of it, but it's a very personal book, so we'll have to see how it's received.
Well, we know you're going to inspire a lot of people with this book, and we know it's a page-turner because you wrote it, and you've done such excellent coverage. Your story is so inspiring to all of us, Ben, and it's great to see you.
That's great
to have you stateside. I know you got to get back to your family in London soon, so I'm so happy to have you here on the set today. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Martha.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.